Welcome to episode 36 of the Coast AFL Podcast with Nick and Blaze. This week, our major talking point will be gather round, as it has officially been confirmed and locked in for round 5 2025. And we will also cover predominantly the AFLW matches that happened over the weekend, where two teams have been eliminated and everyone else has moved on to either the semi-finals or locked into the prelims. We will cover most of those. And there's also a little bit of tidbit of news that we will cover at the start. So let's jump into it. How are you doing, Mr. Psyrick?
Not too bad, not too bad. Obviously, pretty happy. Get myself down to the first final I've ever been to, the AFLW at Fremantle Oval. Might be the last time they play there in terms of finals. We might talk about that sometime in the future. But it was good to be there. Theoretically, seeing Fremantle's last game of finals, unless there's a really improbable situation happening. But apart from that, also went to see the Perth Scorchers women's team midway during the week on Thursday. It was a little doubleheader, which is pretty good as well. Pretty chill, and sort of interesting to compare the vibes between both of them because they had their Pride round. That round,
oh, yeah.
And it was just sort of just interesting to see the two compared, because I went to obviously Pride round in what is it? I think it was against Hawthorn something, I can't remember, but yeah, as I said, so but yeah, it was good fun. Scorchers won too, which was nice.
Excellent.
And it's probably going to be the last bit of sports I'm going to be doing for a while, so good to have 2 wins to see that off.
Yeah, it's a very good way to have a good week in terms of sport. For me,
Yep.
I haven't really been up to much, mostly been working. This past weekend, I took part in helping out production for a big Overwatch tournament. If you want to see, if you're interested in any of that, I did post some of it on my socials, but please go check out Avatar Liger on Twitch and Instagram and Twitter. He's the host of the entire event. It was a lot of fun, and we had a grand old time. Otherwise, yeah, I haven't really been up to much. It's mostly work. It's been a time. I sadly missed out on watching the girls because I was working on that tournament. So I didn't get to see us lose to Port Adelaide, which we will touch on soon. But yeah, otherwise, been a pretty good week, I think. And I'm looking forward to seeing what this week looks up.
Awesome.
So let's jump into a little tidbit of news that we have before we get into the big meteor stuff. And that's going to be starting with Jack Carroll, who was originally delisted by Carlton only a couple of weeks ago, has signed with St Kilda as a delisted free agent.
Yeah, I forgot about that one. Yeah, so is it like a little... I don't even know what he is. It's like a midfield defender, isn't he?
Pretty sure it's a mid defender, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so sort of a bit of the old sauce connection there, I guess. Because I think he would have been drafted when Sauce was list manager still. I think that happened only 3 or 4 years ago.
I think so.
Yeah, it's always been interesting because if you pair like Liam Stocker, Paddy Dow, the other one going from St Kilda to Carlton. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Carlton were, never thought they were too. They gave him a fair shake at it at Carlton. I just never really seen like a player to stick out all too much.
Carlton's depth was only really tested at the end of the season as well.
Yeah, so he got a few games there, and he was just serviceable. So, but in terms of Saints midfield, obviously could use a bit of depth. They're not looking to probably have an early round midfield draft pick, because if they can, they'll probably get a key forward or a key key defender maybe, or just, they're probably going to be going tall rather than stocking up the midfield. But instead it gives them just a few more options. So yeah, it just makes sense, I guess. It's not really that much I can tell you.
It's just
probably could have
just a depth player trying to find some more game time. And St Kilda will probably give him a lot of game time. They're that type of team that probably will fill that sort of hole.
maybe.
I
I
mean,
mean, as I said, even if he doesn't, it's just like good competition from some of the fringier players. As I said, like well, again, like your Paddy Dow's. I'm trying to think who they have fringe in the midfield. I can't know too much about the St Kilda's list, to be honest, but it's just one of those things where the more depth you get, especially as the season goes on, you hope that makes your best 22 a bit better, and if you need to go down one peg to access his service, it won't be as big a drop off.
yep, completely agreed. All right, next on our little tidbit of news is a brief pick swap that happened right at the end of the deadline, where Collingwood received pick 60 and pick 66 from Brisbane, and Brisbane received pick 58. Again, we talked about this at length when the draft period, like when the trade period was actually happening. They're just trading up points for Levi Ashcroft and for their academy player that they're hunting for. I can't remember the name of the player, but they're the two that they're mainly hunting picks for points.
Yeah,
And so I
it's
think
also
I think Collingwood
a
are
list
kind of doing
size
the same
thing as
thing for
well.
something as well, but I don't know what they're
Yeah.
after.
I think Collingwood's just sorry, I think Brisbane traded because they would have had one too many list spots after the draft.
Possibly.
So they
yeah.
would have been overboard. No, I did read that. So, as I said, and it is still like a points thing. Obviously, you want to trade 2-1 while still keeping your points in balance, and then Collingwood obviously have the mathematical right amount of picks.
Yeah.
Again, roll of the dice.
Yeah,
If you have
pretty
what they need, you just get something for free. Statistically wise, that something is marginal, but hey, you get 2 cracks at it. So when you get into that end of the draft, why not?
Yeah,
Blitz place, you might as well.
It's just like whatever. Like 60 and 66, like you hardly see those picks get used in general. Like they're probably just going to get rolled over into the 2025 draft or whatever. So that's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
But it happened.
Yeah, exactly. Like it is technically news. All right, let's jump into the big piece of news that we have, and that's Gather Round. It's officially been locked in. The Festival of Footy over in South Australia is returning for the 2025 season. Its 3rd season in a row off the top of my head. And we started off with a Thursday night blockbuster between the Adelaide Crows and the Geelong Cats at the Adelaide Oval. What do we think?
It makes sense as for a matchup.
Well, yeah, it makes sense to start with one of the home teams.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, the way we'll get to the way they aim to close it off, it's sort of a bit cyclical with the Port Adelaide getting the final home game. We'll talk about that a bit later. But in terms of Adelaide, young rebuilding team versus a normally pretty consistent team. So even if it is a wash, like even if Adelaide do start slow, they're going to get a massive crowd for it, obviously. I don't think they'll have too many concerns there. Obviously, at the Adelaide Oval, it should be a pretty good game. I'm not sure how well Cats fans travel, but I don't think it really matters at that point. So maybe it's actually more of a less represented team getting that big draw, so that some of the more non-Adelaide matchups get a few more people. I don't really know, but yeah, this matchup makes sense. I think Adelaide will improve a bit next year. I think they're banking on that a tiny bit, because as I said, Geelong are pretty much the bar over the last nearly 20 years of regular season football. So
yeah, agreed.
They've given Adelaide a bit of respect there, and should make for a good Thursday night game of football.
Absolutely agreed. All right, next up is a Friday night blockbuster, also at the Adelaide Oval, between Collingwood and Sydney.
Yeah, well, another matchup that just makes sense. Collingwood, obviously renowned for travelling fairly well. Got fans in all states. And as for Sydney, as I said, it's just one of those things where maybe you pair it up a bit. But yeah, as I said, Adelaide Oval, Sydney probably should be a big draw team. Their crowds have picked up a bit this year, considering how well New South Wales went last year, just in general. And yeah, as I said, it's what you expect. Again, it'd probably be a better matchup next year. On paper, theoretically, it would be like this year's top team versus 10th. which isn't on paper that exciting. But I meant these two teams probably should match up something close.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, as I said, it just makes sense for them to be a standalone game, especially on a Friday. I don't know what if they're gonna like plan on any nightlife after the game. I know now maybe the Sydney fans that travel will find it like a bigger nightlife, considering that
The
I think
Sydney's
still
lockout
shut down
laws.
at like 10 p.m.
Yeah, Sydney still has lockout laws.
I still can't believe that.
That's
like
crazy.
That's ridiculous. So you know, the fact that Adelaide nightlife might be like an appealing option if you've travelled over there after the game. So who knows there? But I bet, look, they normally do a pretty good job. They'll have some sort of celebrations afterwards. But you know, it's if you're a travelling fan, it's a great deal. Especially the Victorians, where it's just over the border. If you really wanted, you can travel in and out and be back by, you know, drive back for Sunday, you know what I mean? Like do a day trip back. And as for New South Wales, you know, as I said, you know, probably fly back Sunday, odd, pretty good.
Yeah, if you plan on, I mean, actually, you'll have enough time to catch both Sydney team games if you fly out like late Sunday. You still have
Late Sunday, yeah, exactly.
At home.
So
yeah, it's definitely a good time, I think, for New South Wales fans. All right.
Yeah.
Saturday game, first ever AFL game in the Barossa Valley, and it's between two teams that could possibly be the Spoon Bowl at the time. But what are we thinking between North Melbourne and Gold Coast?
I would say that's harsh, but like I initially slagged off in the group chat about this game, so I can't really.
I had the exact same thoughts as soon as I saw it. It's like, really,
yeah,
like, you're trying to promote AFL games in the Barossa Valley, and you bring these two. That's the first one.
Yeah, exactly, and you know, it's sort of, you know, because it's also running beside a fairly decent Adelaide Oval game, which will be at 12:50. This one's starting at 12:05, and I imagine the Adelaide Oval initial one will get the big draw.
Yeah, probably.
Really, I think you'll get a lot of people, a few more casual fans going out to the Barossa, having, you know, a little wine and dine out there, maybe some chocolates if you're not a big drinking fan. I think they probably have. I actually just made that up. I have no idea what else is at the Barossa Valley apart from wine.
It's probably wine and cheese.
Yeah, maybe cheese. Look, I will say, I have had Adelaide wine. I do think it's actually quite decent. I don't know if that's controversial being from WA. I probably prefer
I don't know. I'm not a wine drinker,
over
so I
New South Wales. That's my hot take. As for this game, this should. I mean, I think the AFL is just hoping for like a sleeper good game. You know, it's two teams that'll be roundabouts. I mean, you would hope Gold Coast would be a step above North, but who knows? Maybe North will be surprising.
Well, considering that North has kind of reconfigured themselves this off season by recruiting a bunch of like mature, like veteran talent, like who knows, they could.
Yeah,
they could be very surprising.
Well, yeah, they'll stabilize a bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like we don't want to.
Because obviously last year that
at the bottom.
start was like their start last year was horrendous. But they ended up being just salvageable by the end of it. Yeah, no, I said hopefully it will be, but yeah, as I said, it's definitely one of the weaker matchups. But you know, as I said, I think, you know, as I said, I think the AFL's just like, well, there's going to be a certain type of people that go to this match. As I said, more of the touristy, maybe more of the casual fans. Introduce them to two of the lower teams, you know, just get them watching football. And, you know, if they have the festivities around, you know, it should be good. As we sort of talking about before the game, they are doing some construction work around that stadium. It will be interesting because I had to look up beforehand, and because I was curious about how much the Mount Barker games got, considering you know, to me they're just both two areas that are out in the sticks, but the Mount Barker game got 18,000 people, a bit over, which was about the same as the Norwood Oval game. So yeah, as I said, I think they're going to have to try and get a pretty big crowd to justify it. And, you know, it may or may not work. So, it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, hopefully the second game will at least maybe coax some people down there, especially, for those two teams that will be playing.
Yeah.
A bit different, because their game's a bit more separated from the other Sunday games. So, this one, I'm not expecting it. I'd expect it to be the least capacitated crowd. But yeah, as I said, hopefully they'll do a good job organizing it because, if the Barossa Valley wanted to try the Norwood game, not Norwood,
The Adelaide game.
the Mount Barker game
Ah,
that
okay.
was already successful, you would think that they would have had to have some good planning or reason to be able to do that. So hopefully they'll be able to back it up.
Yeah, agreed. All right, next is a game that you did actually mention at the same time, the 12:50 Adelaide Oval game on the same Saturday between Carlton and the West Coast Eagles.
Yeah, exactly. And this one just makes sense. Obviously, Carlton, very good. Sorry. Very good fans out of state, normally well attended,
Mhm.
not only in South Australia, but WA as well. So I think there'll be like a big WA connection in this game. I think I've mentioned this before. There's a lot of Italians in WA, and obviously Carlton in the 80s and 90s sort of forged that connection. And obviously, a lot of fly in, fly out people. So Adelaide do host a lot of ex-West Australians or just West Australians on working trips. So even though the Eagles are probably still will be languishing next year, it's just a match that makes sense. Should be able to reasonably fill out the Adelaide Oval, good use of the big stadium,
Mhm.
and yeah, as I said, I don't think it'll be an interesting matchup per se, but I think it'll be one that is good for the keeping the spirits of gather round, making it all capacity as it can and being vibrant.
Yeah, that sounds like it makes a lot of sense to me. Plus, especially this will be like apart from I guess not opening round, but apart from I guess round one, this will be like Mini's first big event game as head coach of an entirely different team.
Sorry, what was it?
This will be Andrew McQualter's like first big like event game
Oh, yeah. I get you. I
as part
get
of
you.
round one.
Yeah. No, probably true. I don't think the Derby will happen before that. I think that was.
No, yeah, I would assume it would be closer to mid-season.
Yeah, sometimes they go early, but yeah, as I said, we'll see about that. But yeah, as I said,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Unless the Derby comes before round five, then this will be second.
exactly.
But
I mean, look, it's a good chance for the Eagles to get a bit of a marquee game in a season where there probably won't be scheduled one. So yeah, it just makes sense.
mm,
Um, yeah, as far as I can tell, the AFL's done a somewhat decent job of scheduling this. I don't know. I don't really have huge opinions, but a lot of this stuff just makes sense to me
yeah,
from first glance.
yeah. I think the schedule actually does make a lot of sense just overall. All right, fifth game on the agenda is also on the Saturday at Norwood Oval at 3:45 p.m. The Western Bulldogs versus the Brisbane Lions. It was initially reported that this was going to also be at the Adelaide Oval, making it 3 AO games in a row. I'm actually very glad that they changed it and it's not the case because
Yeah.
it would have been a nightmare for staff for one and for patrons as
Mm.
well. Um, so also plus seeing Norwood Oval get some love again, like always a very good thing
Yeah,
because it's still
exactly.
close to the CBD. And these two teams definitely have a pretty strong rivalry going on currently anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said, it makes sense to plan such a big, or like a top eight clash on that time spot because obviously a lot of people going to the Adelaide Oval ones will probably stay there back to back. If anything, I would imagine that they'll probably have like a screen or something showing the Brisbane Bulldogs game in between. I don't think they can actually like literally kick people out of the stadiums in between, but I don't really know how a scheduling like that would work.
I have no idea.
Um, but yeah, as I said, but as I said, if fans are keen, they could try and go through all three. I think it's like feasible, isn't it?
It's definitely feasible.
Um,
Adelaide Oval and Norwood Oval aren't that far away from each other.
yeah, exactly. So the real die fans can go to all three. If you just go to one, and maybe you have a family, you want maybe a cheaper ticket, and you still want to watch a very quality game and gather round. This game might be better suited for you, especially if it finishes early, as I said, for families. So, yeah, no, it makes much more sense to have one game separated and have it be a fairly substantial one in terms of the season. We hope. I mean, who knows? Maybe Brisbane and Bulldogs will be bottom 4 next year, but yeah, AFL can't those sort of things.
I mean, we'll talk about this probably early next season, but I do not expect Brisbane to be bottom 4 by this point, considering the other reigning.
Oh no. Look, I'm just saying, like sometimes sometimes AFL has a funny way of making fools of schedulers.
True,
but as I said, on paper, I think they've done the right thing by scheduling this.
Yeah, okay. All right, last for the Saturday games, 7:05 p.m. at the Adelaide Oval. My words are hard sometimes. Is the Melbourne Demons and the Essendon Bombers.
Yeah, it's another interesting one.
Yeah, it's definitely a fairly interesting matchup. Like, especially considering like these two teams, like, there's not really like a sort of rivalry between them, but like they still somehow manage to draw in decent crowds.
Exactly. I mean, as I said, considering you can't just like go all in on these, like you can't just have every match be marquee games, because you've got to spread out through the season. Like this sort of one makes sense. Obviously, you could argue like, why don't you have the bigger drawing one? Like put Brisbane and the Bulldogs in that game. But in terms of stadiums logistics, I would rather put two mediocre Melbourne teams at drawing capacity, make sure those stadiums get filled. Although I must admit, Melbourne had some pretty poor attended games last year.
Yes, they did.
I think the Bombers were fairly well attended, but so that might be, I don't know. But I can't imagine that not. As I said, I don't think they've ever had a non-sold out game at the Adelaide Oval during gather rounds. So, I would imagine it'll still be fairly attended. In terms of the matchup, I imagine, weirdly enough, these two teams will be similar to each other. But yeah, again, we'll probably be more AFL prediction, come post-draft, more beginning of the season, where we'll dive into that. But hopefully they're around the same level.
Fingers crossed.
If you're going to predict it early, why not put those sort of teams together?
Yeah, exactly right. And it's also just because of how the teams are spread throughout the country. It's the only Victoria v Victorian matchup in this entire gather round. Everyone is facing an interstate team.
Yeah,
which is
for the Melksham Cup.
Yeah, really, it is too.
Yeah,
hoping he plays that game. Otherwise, is it really going to be the Melksham Cup?
I don't know. But yeah, as I said, honestly, I think I can't actually think of any. I thought there was another few players. I guess Hibberd.
Michael Hibberd would be the other one.
Yeah, Hibberd obviously retired now, but
yes.
It should be fun.
Tangential matchups. All right.
Exactly.
Speaking of player cups, Sunday. 12:05 p.m. at the Barossa Valley, Richmond v Fremantle, the Shea Bolton Cup.
Yeah, exactly.
This is going to be a very interesting matchup. One, because we have no idea what both of these teams are going to look like going start of the season anyway, especially Richmond, considering I don't know how many players will get back by the start of the season from injury, specifically our ACL issues. I've got no idea who we're recruiting. I don't even know if we're going to be getting rid of any other players or anything like that. I don't think so. I think our list up until the draft is locked in for the most part. But yeah, the Richmond v Freo matchup is always super interesting. So, and I have no idea which way this is going to go.
Yeah, historically it's been a weirdly close contest. I guess it'll give I would say non-Victorian, but it's one of those things where it's produced a lot of close games. It doesn't quite get a hype up that it probably could. It's a borderline modern rivalry. We'll put it that way. But yeah, definitely with some of the off-season narratives, it just makes sense. Again, obviously you got the allure and the Richmond fans out there to probably, I'll leave it to you whether it's respectfully clap or jeer, shy. Probably depend on each person as well. And as for Freo, Honestly, there's probably like a lot of similar comparisons between the Barossa Valley and Margaret River. Obviously, Margaret River being in WA. So maybe they think, hey, we can appeal to that sensibility, encourage a few people to check that out, compare it to the one back home. Even state by state wine, pride. Because I know WA gets a bit precious, I guess. They're obviously thinking. I think there's a few WA winemakers that think that Adelaide and New South Wales are a bit overrated. So I don't know why I'm bringing this up as much. As I said, like there's not too much to say apart from the obvious fact that it's the Bolton Cup. But
Yes.
there's some other little things in there. So again, anyone going, I hope they enjoy the trip. Again, it's another one where being in the middle of the day makes sense as well. Allows people to travel back to Adelaide, get a flight home, and obviously both being mid-Saturday games, they can do stuff afterwards, and just probably stay there for the entire of the weekend. So again, maybe the more casual fans enjoy this one, but still something for the more enthusiastic, more Richmond-blooded, probably fans who enjoy, sink their teeth into.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next on the agenda is Norwood Oval, 2:50 p.m. on the Sunday, St Kilda versus the GWS Giants, 2023 Elimination Final rematch. That's the only kind of storyline that I've got going for them.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think this is the other one that may be a bit of a damp squib, I guess. But, as I said, it's very hard to schedule everything, especially when you are doing Gather Round, what should be almost every year now, at least for the foreseeable future. As I said, you're going to get a few matchups like this. I guess, this is there. I can't really think of much, really. I couldn't imagine a more random pairing of teams, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
like St Kilda and GWS just don't have much overlap.
Yeah, there's like nothing really going for them, like storyline wise, player rivalry
Yeah.
wise. It's just sometimes the teams are good, sometimes the teams are bad, and we don't know which one's going to show up.
Yeah, exactly. As I said, again though, as you mentioned, for those who are keen to just support New South Wales football, coming over from that state, you'll get both of those games, Friday and Sunday. You spend the evening down there. Maybe you go to the Norwood game as well. But at the same time, it gives you enough time to do what you need to do. Go home. If you need to work the next week. As I said, logistic-wise, it's just a game that has to exist, and it makes sense to put it there. It's just not the most enticing head-to-head matchup ever, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I agree. There's just kind of nothing really going for both teams. It's unfortunate, but also like that's just how both teams currently are. So
yeah, I mean, look, GWS have the upside that they're probably going to be good next year, I would think.
Actually, if depending on if they're playing opening round, which we're still not fans of that returning, but it's going to. If GWS are playing opening round, which they likely will be, will they get those suspended players back by this point in time? Because I think some of them were suspended for like 5 games or something. From that,
I don't think so. I think
Keeper.
No, sorry.
Because there was like a couple,
it
was like 2 or 3 players suspended, and the rest were fine.
Yeah, Keeper Hamilton was 2.
Well, he got delisted anyway.
Adam was 2. Yeah, I know, but if he ever gets a game, I don't know. There was one. Oh, Fahey. Fahey was 3 games, so I don't think so.
Okay.
By memory, it was a couple. I think the others got fined and all that. But yeah, as I said, I don't think it's going to be huge implications.
In that case, GWS should be at, for the most part, like full strength. It's
exactly.
All right. Speaking of full strength,
Touchwood, obviously.
Yeah. Speaking of full strength, Sunday night game, actually, 6:50 p.m. at the Adelaide Oval. Port Adelaide versus Hawthorn, the 2024 semi-final rematch.
I mean, considering all that's happened during, what was a fairly fiery, final And
Not to
what was a
mention, sorry to
terrific.
cut in here, but not to mention that there's a bit of a rivalry with the AFLW teams as well between Port and Hawthorn.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. You had that game and obviously the regular season game coming down to the Darcy Byrne-Jones kick at
Mhm.
Adelaide Oval. Um, so, a lot of things there that should suggest that this should be a cracking game. Obviously, a lot of things can happen between the two, but like clearly, this was just like as much of a common sense game you could have. And what I like about some of these matchups is I'm not a huge fan of repeating a finals match like in the first 2 weeks. I think you gotta I don't mind having reasonably level teams and what that, but you know what I mean? Like sometimes I think you gotta let a few teams settle a bit. They're obviously not playing their best in the first couple of weeks of football.
Mm.
So in gather round, it's a great chance to put one of these matchups where it's still in your back of your mind, the players probably will still be able to go back to the finals. You know what I mean? Like as a coach, you probably wouldn't want to be thinking back at the 2024 final series if you're in week 15 or anything.
Yeah.
But during the first few weeks, you wouldn't directly infer it, but you would let some of those emotions ride. You know what I mean? You wouldn't do too much to quell it or put dampeners on things. And like some of those early season matchups, depending on the type of draws you have, this could be like something that maybe sets one of the teams that struggle, maybe to under 500 in terms of percentage. Yeah, along the line, or should be, it's the speculative part of the season. It's a finals matchup from the past. Two teams with a bit of history. Yeah, as I said, it should be an absolute cracker.
And just to go back a little bit on like your point where like teams aren't playing their best footy at the start of the season, but also playing into storylines too much at the same time. I guess it's why, apart from it just being like a dumb idea, is why opening round bothers so many people, because that's what they did with this opening round, is that they played so much into storylines for finals teams from the previous season that also like weren't or exactly up to par at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And you saw it. I mean, obviously, you can't just say, oh, Brisbane and Hawthorn came out of nowhere to get into the finals. But you did see a few teams go in and out of form. And, a lot of the faster paced teams
And Geelong and
tend to play
Brisbane
well.
were two of those at the start of the season.
Yeah, yeah. Well, even on the flip side, Sydney obviously started with a very fast-paced game plan. Did pretty well at the start. Gold Coast, for example, did the same thing. Even maybe you put Carlton in the same category, maybe you don't. I don't know. You know, and plus you had teams like Melbourne who are a bit more defensively.
Yeah.
But they started the scene pretty well. Weren't they 7-3 at one point last season? Before they lost
Pretty much up
Petrarca?
until they lost Petrarca. They were
Yeah,
fairly
or it
solid.
was at least a positive enough.
Yeah, when
So you
they
know
when
what I
they
mean?
lost Petrarca and then they lost Lever and then they lost May for a time as well. That's when everything fell apart for that second half of the season.
Yeah, and I said this just going into judging it for football and all that. It's one of those fun things where it's still in that zone of teams are starting to get a good around round 4, round 5. You can start to get a bit of an insight in who's actually good, who's actually not.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? It's exciting matchups where you don't feel too bad as well if your team loses because you always have hope. Which is always the biggest thing. This is why these sort of rounds are put early in the season, because every team bar maybe 3 or 4 probably at least have some hope of making finals.
Yeah, exactly right.
So,
but yeah, again, we're looking at this 6 months in advance, give or take.
Yeah, exactly.
5-6 months.
I got no idea.
It's not like we have
happen.
any idea at the moment.
Yeah, it's just you want matchups that make sense, and for the majority of it, I think they do. As I said, I don't know enough about South Australian politics or whatever to know how much of the move to the Barossa Valley versus
Just playing
Mount
Mount
Barker
Barker
is. I guess it's good to have to at least experiment with somewhere a bit different.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not exactly sure if it's the best move, but yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. I don't think it's going to be like a massive cataclysmic loss if it ends up being a bit. Eh.
No, I don't. I don't think the AFL's too bothered. If they don't get the numbers or that sort of thing out from the Barossa games, I think they're just happy. I think they're just happy to experiment in this case, considering like the agreement is that they've got like the South Australia has gather round up until 2028, I think,
Yeah,
something like that.
exactly.
So I think they're perfectly happy with experimenting with a couple of different locations. Like we might not
Yeah.
go to Mount Barker or the Barossa Valley in 2026. Might go somewhere else entirely, on top of obviously Norwood and AO. But it's not a bad thing. Like trying to grow the game. Granted, South Australia is an AFL state, but trying to grow the game in the
Yeah.
more rural side, in the more country sort of aspects of the state is definitely a good thing.
And plus, on the flip side, it sort of does have like a mini reward for those country people that make the effort to travel in. It's something a bit closer to home. They can celebrate their region rather than having to go in every week. And even, if you have people traveling there, like we know, a good friend between us two who's down into the rural outskirts of South Australia,
Yes.
and for other people, they might visit their friends or, go countryside traveling. So,
Plus, it's
as
also
long as it's,
bringing like a big attraction like the AFL to like more rural regions is good for business. Like it's good for the smaller
yeah, exactly.
businesses. It's good for the growth of the economy in those areas. It is definitely a great idea.
Yeah,
Not that
exactly.
the Barossa Valley probably needs it, considering it already is pretty famous for all its wines. But
Yeah, I know, but so sometimes you have to build up that centralized point so that other communities around, like I know in WA, a lot of countrysides have done that, where you have like one really big town center, and then a few others on the outskirts. That still have nice things, but you still have that big draw
yeah,
to get them
yeah, exactly right.
the people there. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to our other big juicy bit of talk, and that will be the AFLW matches that happened over the weekend. The finals started, the qualifiers and the eliminations, and our first match will be the North Melbourne Kangaroos versus the Adelaide Crows with their new logo. They are not messing around. We all have opinions on it, but we're not going to talk about it. Let's talk about the girls. How did they perform?
It was a very weird match, honestly. It's weird because if you look at the scoreline, it's 5-8-38 for North Melbourne to 5-1-31 for Adelaide. So you think, oh, the Kangaroos mucked around a bit. They weren't converting. Otherwise, they probably should have had this game in hand. But actually watching it, it was Adelaide that dominated a chunk of the possessions early. They couldn't really convert their inside 50s to scores. So yeah, the efficiency inside 50. North Melbourne were going at a score every 53% of their entries, where Adelaide was at 25% of their entries, which would be a bit disappointing because a few Adelaide girls had some pretty good looks at the ball, especially Gould early. I think she had the most marks inside 50 for the round.
Mm-hmm.
I think Ponta also had a bit of the ball. And yeah, it was just Kangaroos defense holding strong until they can get momentum. And when they did, they ended up ramping up their scoring. Yeah, as I said, overall, though, it was a pretty. I guess it was a bit of an in between the arcs game. Obviously, not too high scoring. But yeah, as I said, the more. I guess when you're as talented as the Kangaroos, the more you possess the ball, and this is comparing it to a team with players like Marinoff, who did win the Met. I should say Marinoff won the or was it the players voted best player in the league one?
The women's MVP. I don't know what the actual
Yeah,
name
yeah,
of it is, but
exactly.
essentially that.
Obviously their Brownlow night, like the AFL men's, is a week before the finals,
Mm-hmm.
or on the week leading to the finals, I should say. But yeah, I think Marinoff won the player. I think it's player voted, might be player or coaches, but yeah, as I said, well deserved there. But even despite that, and other players like Randall obviously had a really good game. It was just the weighted numbers by North Melbourne. Adel in that halfback line, 34 disposals. I think the most for the round, and pretty big on halfback. And, Mia King also in that, just really stood strong, got those intercepts. And, in the end, I won't say they fully got their scores off halfback because they were able to get a lot of pressure again later as the match went on. But definitely when Adelaide were initially starting out, as I said, those players on the halfback rebounding did pretty well. And, it's what I said about the Kangaroos is don't be deceived by how much they were able to generate score, especially due to playing some of the worst of teams in the league, during the finals. Leading up to the finals. Their defense is just very solid. And, this is why they're such a hard team to beat. Obviously, with this matchup, maybe they are fallible. As I said, they definitely look exposed early on by Adelaide. But, as I said, in the end, it's just you can't just be giving North Melbourne chances like that. And in the end, they just showed that they were too good by muscling away at the end of it.
Yeah, so I'm just scrolling through the stats now, just so podcast can see it. A lot of contested possessions, uncontested possessions, turnovers, they're all fairly even all through. I assume most of it's off halfback and through the midfield. Marks are fairly even, marks inside 50 even. It's clearly been it was a really intense back and forth just by stats alone, it looks like. But scoreline, scoreline always tells it all sometimes.
Yeah, and as I said, it was more just the flow of the game, especially in that in the second quarter, I think Adelaide had North Melbourne only had 2 inside 50s to Adelaide's 9 or something like that. And yet Adelaide were only able to register only able to register a goal off that. It was that period. While North Melbourne were dominated, they didn't get a score line. And it was a really interesting game, one of the other games as well, where teams seem to score in quarters. Because North Melbourne had 2 quarters where they didn't score a goal. Adelaide had scored a goal in every quarter, but very much more spread out. So, it's just very interesting where, despite where you might count it as uneven by North Melbourne, their second half, they're able to convert a lot more out of their control than what Adelaide were able to do with their control. And add on that, North Melbourne left a few points on the board by being a bit inaccurate in that second half. So
definitely should have put them away, but they clearly didn't have their kicking boots on in that second half.
I guess. It's still a very solid defense. A very solid defensive unit by Adelaide, but as I said, it was pretty much a few really good performances by the the key position players by both teams. So as I said, Randall I think kicked a couple of goals. Oh no, 1 goal. Eddie kicked a couple out of nowhere by memory. Sheila Birch. It's about all I really have to say about this game. It's sort of hard because, it's a bit hard to, really go in depth about North Melbourne because obviously, again, they're pretty much stacked with talent. This is sort of what we expect them, but there's still, again, something about Northern Finals where you don't want to say it's, psychological at this point because, really, they haven't been that bad. They made the finals last year, obviously, lost by a bit, even though they were expected to win. The year before, they were, around about the mark, but probably should have gone a bit further. For North Melbourne, it's all about, just staying composed, obviously winning, because, from here on out, if they lose, they lose. But, as I said, they're gonna go back on their finals seasons of the past. keep up their composure because, as I said, there's still some very experienced teams in the finals, especially the other one that made it to the qualifying finals that we'll talk about in a bit. But as for Adelaide, they bow out. They'll face the winner of the next game we're going to talk about at Adelaide Oval. With still some fairly positive things to look forward to. They definitely still look like a fairly complete side, just not finishing off probably as much as they should have.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment, I would say. All right, let's segue on to that next match. Speaking of Fremantle and Essendon with a scoreline of 5-6-36 to 4-2-26.
Yeah, well, obviously there was a few things about this game. It was one of those weird games where there's been a lot of games at Fremantle Oval where one on the ground, both teams just haven't been able to score. We'll call it the honestly, it's kind of sad too because there's no fans in that area as well because the way that Fremantle Oval is, there's a members section that cuts off that end of the ground and the entranceway. So to go there, you have to walk all the way around. Most people don't, so it's always barren. Teams just can't score goals up at then. And early on, I thought Fremantle were a bit wasteful. They had a lot of possession kicking up that way, but weren't able to convert. I was like, oh, this is going to be another game where they kick away. But unfortunately for Essendon, 2 quarters up that end, couldn't get a scoring shot. So, yeah, it was very much a wind-affected game. The other news was obviously the injury in the second quarter to Maddie Prespakis. Really horrible to see that. She was doing fairly well. She was playing in the middle, getting a lot of clearances, and causing a bit of trouble because Essendon, I thought they played pretty well. I thought the way they approached Fremantle, they were trying, especially the first goal that they got, they were trying to expose them out the back. Freo are a very good intercepting team, so if they can get the ball moving forward, break early before they get their defensive matchups set up. They thought they had an avenue to goal, and honestly, they did for a couple. And also, Essendon just kicked a couple of really beautiful snapshots. There was a lot of really good goal kicking for a game that was 5-6, 4-2. But at the end of the day, they sort of just eventually got beaten at the contest as it went on. Obviously, one of the biggest performances, probably for the round, if not, is a ruckman, at least in general, in a final. Mim Strong led the disposals of 26, a massive 57 hitouts. 55 hitouts out of the 57 that Fremantle got, and which was the most in AFLW history, sorry. And also, Mim Strong ends up being, from this year, having the top hitouts, number 1, number 2, number 3. She represents all 3 of the most hitouts in the game, all crazy. From the season. So, absolutely massive game from her. And you just saw it. At the start, she was having a few hitouts that went directly to the opponents. It wasn't that great. But eventually, she just well, if I'm not being as clean as the hitouts, I'm just going to smack it right out the ruck. So she just grabbed it in the fourth quarter, got so much distance. And in the second quarter, it was a really crazy sequence of events. It was near the end of the quarter. Johnny Docker was going around. I just see him out the corner of his eye. He picks up a kid. I'm like, is Johnny Docker just really going to steal a kid before the quarter ends? And then they have a ball up in the ruck contest. I'm slightly distracted. I turn back to the game. I just see a random boot and kick through a goal. And turns out Mim Strong just taps it onto a boot, gets a goal. I don't know if it's 100% skill. There's a bit of luck in terms of it, but it's probably one of the best ruck goal in AFLW, at least for the year. So yeah, as I said, it was a very strange game. There was a lot of entertaining things, a bit of period of non-scoring, but the scoring that was there was very good. And as for Essendon, as I said, there was a lot of good things. It was a very contested game. But one of the players, I did briefly mention her. I didn't really appreciate her game as much because when I saw her, she was absolutely fantastic. Georgia Nanscowan, she's been around the league for a while. I think she's about 30 years old.
Okay.
Absolutely tiny little unit, about 165. 20 disposals, 7 clearances, 11 tackles. She is such a hard worker.
Absolute
and
jet, sounds like.
yeah, exactly. But, as I said, and typical redhead, like absolutely pasted with sunscreen. Like, the only person that's going to damage her, it looked like, even though being a tiny unit, was the sun. Because she was brave in every contest, especially considering, obviously, Prosparkus going down. She had a bit less help in the clearances. So she led the team with 7 clearances herself. Mim, obviously, with 11 clearances, was the only player to even remotely get that high with 11 herself. So, in what was a very fierce contested contest, like, you had some ridiculous tackling numbers.
I was just about to mention
Gabriel,
that because
yeah,
I've left that sitting on screen for a while. Specifically tackles inside 50 because it's 19-7, which is huge for Fremantle. It's so much forward
yeah.
pressure.
It's just the way that Freo play. Unfortunately, it means that a lot of their entries inside 50 can be a bit rushed. They're more than willing to concede bringing it to ground if it's to put their pressure on. It's sort of a throwback to how they used to play in the early games of AFLW. It was sort of the joke that Freo probably planned to give the opposition the ball just so they could tackle them. Because, they were tackling a very good tackling team early on, and there's still signs of it. Obviously, it's what you got to do because obviously Freo, they're missing a few players. Obviously, themselves, Kiara Bowers obviously out for the year, Stat Net out for the year, and Anya Teague out for the year. One due to two-digit injury, one due to pregnancy. I saw Kiara Bowers with a kid at the game. Absolutely adorable kid. I don't know if they ever want to play AFL, but hopefully there might be a bit of talent coming through in a future draft pick. But back to the game. Gabrielle Newton, 20 tackles, 5 players had the amount of possessions that Gabrielle Newton had tackles. And she also had 21 disposals herself. She's not the cleanest player ever, but absolutely big effort. Arlene McCartney, 14 tackles. Mim Strong, again, with 6 herself. I think Mim was best on field. But as I said, Nance Gowan with 11 tackles and Kane with 14 herself. I think she's the ruckman for Western, if I'm not mistaken. But as I said, absolutely big pressure game, a bit contested. It's sort of interesting because it's sort of the AFLW game that people tend to complain about.
Yeah.
But being that it's finals football, being there was a lot of pressure, it was still pretty fun to watch, and the crowd was pretty great. A bit under 5,000 for Freo, which is pretty much, I would say, about 75% capacity. Probably about as much as you want. Otherwise, it starts getting a bit crowded there. Especially since it's only stone steps seating, unless you go to the old stands. So, as I said, a very enjoyable game to watch as well. Beautiful day in Freo. And as I said, I will give a lot of credit to Essendon because they were really trying, despite their injuries, despite, being a fairly young team hoping to improve, but didn't quite get their way this season. They definitely didn't go out without a fight. They definitely really only the St Kilda game this year that you could argue they really let go of them. So they won most of the matches they expected to win. They still had a fairly good year overall. But as I said, be a bit disappointing for the girls, and I guess Essendon as a whole, not to get a finals win. They sort of want to get that monkey off the back. I know the women's team aren't that responsible for them as an overall.
But it's kind of just become an
but
organization thing rather than just a men's league thing.
Yeah, well, look, I'm going to say, I think the women's, like I said, I thought they were well coached. They had a plan to try and beat Freo. They had opportunities. It just didn't work out for them. So, as I said, it's just a bit shrug your shoulders. But as I said, as for Freo, they go into next round. They face Adelaide. It'll be a bit of an interesting contest because Adelaide have some very powerful forward line units. Versus one of the best intercepting teams in the AFL, being Fremantle. So, it's a bit of an interesting matchup defensively. And both teams showing a bit lack of conversion in their 450 entries. So it's really going to be a matter of which team can capitalize. And when you have such an experienced team like Adelaide, you never want to rule them out.
Yep.
But Fremantle's young. Fremantle's exciting. No one's really expecting them. Well, probably not many people expect them to get this far. So, the hubris of the young, they never think they're out of it. So hopefully it should be an absolute cracker down South Australia way where they face them.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that as we wind down the rest of the AFLW chatter. But until then, let's move on to our next match, being Hawthorn and Brisbane, with the scoreline being 4-2-32 to 6-2-38.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get to watch this one. I was off visiting my grandparents. Obviously, being I think this started at like 10 o'clock WA time.
Let me.
It's a bit hard. I
yes.
think so because
it did start
women's
around 10 a.m. WA time.
So yeah, a tiny bit like the North Melbourne game. I think it was Brisbane that started slow, wasn't it? Hawthorn got to a bit of a jump, looked to have a bit of control, but then just sort of a bit of a halt on scoring. As I've mentioned, Hawthorn can play really fast, but when you come up to an experienced team like Brisbane, they know how to control the ball. Momentum can swing quite a bit. Obviously, I should mention the scoreboard, 4-8-32 to 6-2-38 in favour of Brisbane. So Hawthorn did miss a lot of shots on goal, especially in that first quarter. I think it was, they started off the game with 2-5. So when you're a young team, you really want to capitalise, again, up against a pretty quality side like Brisbane.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side, there were apparently some pretty decent defensive matchups early on. One of the better goal kickers, I think, leading goal kicker for Brisbane, Dakota Davis, kicked a couple. Taylor Smith as well. They had to get into the game late. Kathy Psyrick as well got a couple of goals. She's had like a very quietly impressive year.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of a bit of a fringe player, but this year sort of stood up, helped Brisbane score a lot this season. It's why they're one of the better attacking teams. But yeah, apart from that, pretty even numbers in terms of, general possessions. And I really can't, again, without watching it, I can't really tell you too much about it. But yeah, as I said, it'll be very interesting because it does lead up to a very interesting finals matchup next week. In the, what do you call it? Semi-finals. But yeah, as I said, it's not really much to say. Like, it's a very low possession game, really. Like a lot of just meters gained. As I said, so it's sort of, I guess one of those things where it'll be interesting to see, how much of Hawthorn's running carry game that they still bring on to next week, especially since it did work on so early. Whether they try and bring it to Port, who they're facing up against, getting a bit ahead of ourselves. But yeah, as I said, I guess for Hawthorn, young team haven't won a finals yet. You want to say, hey, look, we did a lot of the right things. Obviously, inaccuracy didn't work out for us. This is what we got to do to tighten up when, experienced team like Brisbane are coming back at us.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so they'll learn from this. It's a bit of a shame because obviously at home, great chance to get the preliminary final, but not to be. And as for Brisbane, as I said, I feel bad because again, I don't know all that much about Brisbane. I haven't got a chance to watch it much this year, and it's the only game I didn't really catch up on this week. So I'll definitely try and watch for the prelim. I'll try and watch both games, obviously, but as I said, you can't discount them. Excellently coached team, great players. And also a bit interesting because apparently at the end of the game, there was a tiny bit of a scuffle between Emily Bates, who used to play for Brisbane. He had a pretty fantastic game in that back line, got a lot of intercepts. But yeah, so it'll be interesting. It's not impossible that we'll get this matchup again for the grand final. So, Maybe we'll see if that carries on to any future game. But yeah, it's very interesting because, a lot of player movements tend to be fairly well received in the AFLW. Like, it's not like the AFL where like crosstown rival trades are very rare, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Essendon and Carlton trades, unless it's a very fringe players, don't happen. West Coast and Fremantle, that normally happens only out of pure necessity. Where in the AFLW, there's been a few players. Obviously, Aisling McCarthy was a former West Coast player. Dana Cook? The one that used to be the Olympic hurdler, went from Freo to West Coast in that opening thing. Unfortunately, didn't ACL. I don't think she actually got back into the finals. Obviously, Roxy Rue is another one. Great player, now plays for West Coast. So yeah, it's just very interesting to see. Because like I know a lot of the AFLW is like seen as a bit more I don't want to say like too friendly, but definitely more approachable. Yeah. And I think like it's a great quality to have. Like it's funny because you do get like a lot of off the cuff stuff. Not only like in commentaries and interview, it's a bit looser. So it's not like they're all like AFL trained, responses that we get. But there's definitely a lot more camaraderie. So it is always interesting to see where it does boil over a bit. But you know what? As I said, it'll be just like interesting if this matchup occurs. If not in the finals next year, it might be the beginning of a little rivalry there. Who knows?
Who knows? And like, yeah, I agree with you in terms of like just how the AFLW like kind of currently stands in terms of like being a lot more approachable, a lot more casual, a lot more like easier to probably get into, rather than like trying to approach the men's league. Because with the men's league, you also have to, deal with all of the intricacies of rivalries and why some players move to other teams for like sometimes it even is just for rivalry purposes. Why contracts don't even matter anymore, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. And, there was a bit of talk. There was an article this week by the former Bulldogs coach, I think, sacked in 2023. And you know what? I'm not going to talk about it too much because it was a half a whinge article, I'm going to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But, it still highlighted a point where a lot of these players, because of the, because of the way that the contracts work, they're still essentially not quite enough to be paid to live off the work that you do during the AFLW season.
They're basically paid as part-timers rather than full-timers in this instance.
Yeah,
it's similar to the umpires.
Yeah, and it makes the competition a bit two-tier, I guess, in terms of players, because obviously you got the players that are superstars. They're likely to get brand deals away from the game, like your Daisy Pierces, who can just waltz into commentary roles and, even coaching, I guess.
Yeah, she's...
Not to say she doesn't deserve it.
No, she's incredible, but she has managed to forge herself a really interesting career path.
Oh, exactly. But you know what? Like, not all AFLW players will get to experience like that. Hopefully it gets better in the future. So you know what I mean? Like, for a lot of women, like the amount of seriousness, but the match by match importance in terms of like pure revenue, in terms of, in terms of even just being able to move clubs, because, like not all of these women are going to be able to move interstate to prolong their career. So you know what, so there's always going to be like a few interesting, I'm not going to say like niggly bits and pieces here, but you do got to understand, like, as much as a positive competition, like just the way that the system's set up, it's not going to be, a bunch of perfectly integrated people. There will be like a tiny bit of resentment here and there every now and again. I'm not sure if this was it. You can only guess. But you know what, as I said, in terms of the viewing product, it gets a bit more storylines, but I think as fans, you got to agree, is like, you want the league to look after all the players. So most of stuff that happens on field is just naturally great game rivalries, which is more than often what you want to see in games.
Yeah, exactly right. Like you don't want to see like stuff that happens like off season with the boys to happen with the girls. Like because well, mostly for the fact that it's still a growing brand, the AFLW, whereas like so you don't want as many mistakes, like as big as the sort of stuff that the boys have been up um, to affect the girls because they
Yeah,
will actually hinder the growth of the game, unfortunately.
yeah. Obviously, slightly different, situations there. But I know what you mean. It's like, one of the things you like come to realize, as these things get on is like with the men's, it's so insular where you have things ruled by cliques. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like, and a lot of these, these are like young men coming into the system that once they're in the AFL product, the only people they'll really know are people in the system. You know what
yeah.
I mean?
It's
Whereas
either
the
they either know their own teammates or the people that they were drafted alongside in their like the same
yeah,
draft year.
whereas the AFLW is the complete opposite. Is like you got a very broad range. For a lot of these women's, they can forge huge bonds, within the club, but they don't necessarily have to, if they're not that sort of player, or obviously as a coach, you want professionally to be able to go on,
Yeah, you want to be
as
able to
well as they can.
trust your teammates and not have to worry that
Yeah,
something's going to go
exactly.
awry.
So yeah, so as I said, so it's just sort of one of those things where, it almost sticks out a bit more that something like this does happen. But, as I said, you got to remember that at the end of the day, there's still like a big level of competition. There is the finals, and you got a player that, essentially went from her club to another club. You know what I mean? I can't imagine Brisbane would be too hung up about it, really. I mean, they've won a couple of premierships. I think Bates has probably done all that she ever needed to do at Brisbane. But yeah, as I said, just a little funny way to end a pretty what was apparently an entertaining game.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, let's move on to the last match of week one of the finals. Uh, Funnily enough, it's between both of our men's leagues, except as women's leagues. It's Port Adelaide and Richmond. I unfortunately didn't get to watch this game as much as I wanted to because I was working that production over the weekend. Um, Scoreline doesn't look pretty. I'm gonna be honest. I know you've watched this game, but
Yeah,
yeah. I mean,
it
look,
wasn't as bad as the final scoreline indicated.
I
I'm going
know
to be
that as much. I
honest.
know our first half. I know our first half was somewhat steady. Like we did defend fairly well, at least in that second quarter and third quarter. But yeah, Port Adelaide just had control for most of that game.
Yeah, I will say, like, of all the games, like, Port Adelaide, one of the best performances I've seen of them all year. I've normally been able to check out their games, and I don't think I've quite seen, especially in the forward line, as much chemistry as they were able to pull out in that game. Richmond were playing decently well, but defensively they were able to stifle a few of their star players. Not so much in the forward line. Now, both teams actually had pretty great forward line efforts. Obviously, for Richmond, that was Katie Brennan who kicked a couple, and I think former St Kilda player Ashland Bryson.
Yes, it is. She did.
Yeah, she kicked 4 goals. Absolutely great game by her. And Yasia as well. She threatened to break the game up multiple times. I think she only kicked the 1 goal, but I think she narrowly missed another one. That was pretty impressive. But yeah, as I said, Port Adelaide, I mean, in the first half, they were doing all the good things defensively. It was going back and forward, and it was pretty line bowl who was going to win it. They're doing a good job at keeping Monconti's influence fairly limited. Matilda Scholes having an absolutely fantastic game in the ruck. So it was a few, I guess, different players for Richmond who had to have a big role. I think Grace Egan played a pretty good game as well. Also, someone you mentioned last week that I hadn't really got a chance to pay attention to, but put a hand up, Beth Lynch
Yes.
in the back line. absolutely feasted on intercepts. She was positioned very well, pretty great in the back line. But yeah, as I said, yeah, come, I think halftime, or I think I gotta check this. Sorry, I've lost the
You're good.
stats for the game.
You are all right. I'm just slowly
Yeah,
scrolling
so,
through, like just the team stats overall. It seems it's fairly even across the board in terms of tackles, which is very interesting to see, actually.
yeah. Because really, as I said, there wasn't too much against the two teams. It's just when Port clicked on, because Richmond, Port got a bit of a buffer at halftime, a very late goal by Ella Borg, great running goal, I will say. Sort of gave them a bit of a buffer, 34-21 at halftime. And then, yeah, Richmond just go 3 goals in the space of 5 minutes, hit the lead. And, it was looking to be like, wow, are Port going to, cough this up a bit? Yeah, as I said, 2 goals by Greiser, 1 by Yasira.
Yeah, I believe that's what I saw.
Anyway, and then yeah, an absolutely thrilling goal from a ruck contest. I always think of Ducks when I see her name, Caitlin Wendland, but I think it's because after that point the game was Wendover. Poor Adelaide absolutely stormed from there. You didn't laugh at my duck joke, which I'm very disappointed at.
No,
I
I
spent
laughed. I
ages
just
on
didn't
that.
verbally laugh.
No, please. Yeah, for the Spotify listeners, can you insert the laugh track? Anyway, we'll fix that in post. We'll fix that in post. Anyway, but yeah, it was Old Port from there. Levecki got a goal. Ash Saint really got into the game. Gemma Houghton absolutely got into the game. And yeah, they just had no answers for Port's forward line. They started moving the ball very quickly. Unfortunately, during the end of the game, there was a couple of injuries. I think Eastman was a bit earlier, but then Katie Brennan. I think in the end she actually seriously injured her hamstring. When I say serious, she would have missed games if they advanced. Obviously they didn't, so it should just be going into the off season. But yeah, as I said, it was one of the most impressive. Honestly, just overall, I think in this game has some of the best AFLW goals in terms of just like the entire game full stop.
Oh, yeah.
Watch the highlights for it. There was a lot of terrific snaps. Richmond were pretty clinical. There were a few rush behinds. But yeah, as I said, both teams were going just below 50% efficiency inside 50. So most of the time they were getting into it. They were scoring. Yeah, as I said, it was more just as the game went on. As I mentioned, the clearance work started to get up in terms of Port flavour. As I said, Monconti getting shut down sort of allowed some of the other players like Dowrick as well. Said before, Scholes also got a few. Christy Lamb got a few clearances. And yeah, as I said, yeah, it was just honestly one of the most impressive performances, as I said, in terms of just like, if you pick the team that played the best in the first week of finals, and I know Richmond, they finished 7th. You could argue they weren't the best team. They played pretty well. But yeah, Port Adelaide, by far the most impressive game of that final series. I'm not going to say they're going to win it. I've got doubts over next week. But if they can play this aggressive brand of football, it should be an absolutely great head-to-head matchup against Hawthorn next week.
Sounds extremely interesting, actually. Like I'm very granted. I'm only just now kind of getting into the AFLW, like being more interested in the girls, especially one because I want to just talk more about the AFL in general. Like it'd be nice to be able to branch out a bit more. And two, just I want to support my team, and if I can do that in the men's off season by supporting the girls, I will happily take that. I'm very impressed that the girls made finals. I'm very proud of them for making finals. But yeah, Port just too good in most cases. They're just incredibly strong team. The semi-final is going to be very interesting next week. Hopefully I'll be able to watch it because I actually do want to watch it. But yeah.
Yeah, and I will say, like, Richmond, like, I think they had a pretty impressive season too. As I said, due to injuries, they sort of fell a bit short. Arguably had one
Sounds
of the hardest
familiar.
schedules. Yeah, I know. And a lot's been said, like, obviously, I think the Hawthorn coach, I think, weirdly enough, said that, that they were tired of hearing, that they had easy schedules. But I think it's just one of those things where it's a bit of a quirk where it's not so much, teams are necessarily like, it's not easy in terms of the fact that, um, every game week in, week out is easy. But, it's just, partially a bit of luck and partially who you face. Because, as we see in an 18-team year, you can't predict exactly who's going to rise and fall. So when you only have 10 games, and if you have like a 2-game swing, where you face like easier opponents than you expect, that's absolutely huge in course of the season. And as for Richmond, they were pretty impressive for the most games. The only real game that they sort of, I won't say butchered, but, will be a bit disappointing for them was the draw against Essendon. And, they were a team that finished 8th and didn't really have a terrible matchup. A terrible match for the year. I think they may have got flogged by North Melbourne, but I think that was it, in terms of really big losses. So, I think unfortunate that they obviously didn't get a home finals. They were shaping that way for most of the season. Faltered a bit at the end. But at the end of the day, a pretty good season. And they are a very young team with some obviously star-studded talent with Monconti and Katie Brennan, as well as a few others. So, they'll be up and around next year. I most guarantee it. As for this year, they bowed down in what was, a really big shootout, because, the other fun fact was Richmond was the second highest scorer of the week, I think.
With Port Adelaide being first. So
yeah, exactly. So, sometimes the AFL's funny like that. So, 48, and the next task was 38 by the Kangaroos. So,
well, there you go.
We'll see if how the matchup ends up being. But as I said, we have one half of the bracket where it seems like you're getting more defensive matchups, and the other half where we may be seeing like some more offensive football. So it might be an interesting path to the AFLW Grand Final. There'll be some more narratives, but we can only take it a week at the time. And do you want to have a look at the semi-final fixtures?
I do. Let's jump over to that now. So first on the agenda is the Adelaide Crows versus the Fremantle Doggers at Norwood Oval. Fun fact.
Yep. Stadium we're talking about a fair bit, obviously. What's to say about this game? Again, we sort of mentioned a bit before at the start. Both teams probably struggled a bit more offensively than they would have liked, especially Adelaide, who have had more potent forward line. Freo obviously missing a few players, sort of playing, I won't say like a B team forward line because, they've had to adjust, but definitely players that you would think are a bit more developing than ready set, like Kukolak, the player that I only ever refer to as Hyphen because she has a really long hyphenated name. And, Olalali, who's, young, small player that's sort of more developing. But, as I said, it does make it a bit of a surprise packet for Adelaide. When they first played them this year, unfortunately, Freo didn't score a goal against them. 6 behinds to 5-9-39 at the Adelaide Oval. I'm not actually sure head-to-head. Okay. I'm trying to find the overall head-to-head. I was just wondering if Freo's actually ever won against Adelaide, but I think they have. But it's definitely a matchup more in Adelaide's favour.
Yeah.
Obviously being one of the best regular season teams in the AFLW. But yeah, as I said, yes, they would have, because I think they went undefeated when they were in Adelaide's pool, back when that used to be, what do you call them? Group A, Group B.
Oh, yeah.
Scheduling.
Before they became a full national competition.
Well, I mean, full national, but yeah, as I said, like full, everyone playing each other-ish. Yeah.
I'm sure. I'm
Anyway,
sure at some point they will expand upon 10 rounds, but that'll
yeah,
take time.
exactly. But yeah, as I said, yeah. But as I mentioned, again, Freo by memory in that game, I was obviously there for that. They still had a bit, like they were definitely beaten. I think they've gone better at the contest since that game. But they really can't afford to let Adelaide's midfield, which is obviously one of the best in the league, get too far ahead of them. Obviously, you can't contain it fully, but you need to at least find ways to minimize Marinov, whether that's, someone like Mim Strong, like really taking a hold of that ruck contest, or, like maybe, I don't know so much as a tag, but, just make sure you have a really hard body midfield effort. Maybe you put someone like a Newton up against her, even though it's like not best player against best player, someone who's a bit more pressure and tackling more than winning possession. Maybe you change that up a bit. But as I said, they can't afford to let Adelaide get too much control. They want to be able to limit that as much as possible, especially away from home. They want Adelaide to feel the pressure to try and convert. And as I said for Freo, it's almost essential that they, they can't go too much away from their own game. They're a very high tackling inside 50 team, as you pointed out. And they do essentially just rely on weight and numbers for inside 50s to score. But occasionally they are going to have to put some trust, lower the eyes, find someone. And a player like Hayley Miller hasn't played overly that much this season, but when she has gone into the forward line, is an absolute threat. So, even if she, she won't play full-time forward, but especially as she's coming back still from injury, I think this is her first full game playing. I think she played the week before, but sort of on restricted minutes.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, you might actually see her play a bit of a hybrid role in that forward line, and offer a bit more danger because so they're going to need to convert a bit more, as well as not let Adelaide get as much control as they did in that final matchup. Sorry, not final matchup. The previous matchup that happened earlier in the season.
Yeah, sounds like it's going to be extremely interesting. I should note that this is a 3:35 p.m. game on the Saturday, November 16th. Both games are on the Saturday, one leading into the other, which is very good for scheduling, I think, having both blockbuster games on the same day. But speaking of, let's move on to the second game, which is a 7:30 game.
Actually, I hope you don't mind, but I would like to touch on that. Just because I find it interesting. It's a bit weird, like, in terms of fixturing, because I don't think it's a worth thing having these games back to back. But it's a weird quirk how, whenever there's been a semi-final, there's, in the men's team, it's like
Friday and a Saturday.
Fixture. One's on a Friday, one's on a Saturday afternoon. Like, it's not even any change of time. Whereas the AFL has been very scattered amongst the time that they want to play, which, I mean, you kind of get to a degree because when you're dealing with smaller ovals, you have to take considerate care not to, put anything on at weird times or even, competing with other women's sport. As I said, the Big Bash is coming in. Even stuff like the basketball, you have to even put into mind.
Yeah, I think like the basketball season, the netball season is all on at the moment as well.
Yeah. I think the netball season's on. But yeah, as I said, but, as I said, it's just, a tiny bit weird that it changes almost every year. But, it is what it is. Just a little quirk, I guess.
I think in this case, it's good just because it's consistent viewership numbers, at least to try and at least grow the game. At least, on a televised scale. Because that way it's easier to transfer viewership over from one game to the next because it's all broadcast on the same networks.
And I think Free to Air has the whole final series.
I believe Channel 7 or 7 Mate or whatever.
7
will do have the finals.
As I said, they want to get to because in terms of viewership, Norwood Oval shouldn't be. Oh, sorry, not viewership. In terms of grounds, Norwood should be fine.
Yeah, agree. And Icon Park as well, which we're about to touch on anyway, has been pretty good so far as I'm aware.
It had a bit of middling crowd for the North Melbourne game, but North Melbourne's had some weirdly low crowds at times. So maybe that's also why they put them both on Saturday, because the Friday game was the only game to get under 2,000 viewership, attendance, I think it was.
Possibly.
So maybe that's what put that decision. But it was just interesting to see. But as for Hawthorn, their fans have actually turned up relatively okay. I've heard Icon Park's also not that great to get into as well.
That sounds about right for Carlton.
Well. Yeah. So, but yeah, in terms of that game, this is the matchup that's on paper should be an absolute delight.
Absolutely.
I've mentioned before, Hawthorn, like moving the ball fast. They've got a good talent, a good array of forward talent that have more often than not been able to capitalize. Obviously, as I mentioned before, sorry, not mentioned before, Aileen Gilroy and Greta Bodie being the spearheads towards theirs, as well as having one of the more prominent ruck follower duos in terms of Lucy Wales and Emily Bates. Also, I've mentioned their backline, pretty solid. And overall, I think if you went in area by area, like consistently, I think you'd say like Hawthorn have the wood. But this back end of the season, you can't deny that Port Adelaide's just found players that have gone a bit above expectations. They're not necessarily star players in the league. And I've even mentioned before, Wendland, what's her name? I really like it too. Plays in the back line. I've talked about it before.
Name
I need to look it up
right now.
I think it's Day. It's not, is it? Ebony O'Day. That's it. Piper Window as well. Abby Dowrick. I could go on. Syme as well. So yeah, as I said, especially in that back half area, but also towards their forward line, where they have a bit more experience, but they're now getting a bit more fleshed out. The return of Julia Teakle for Port Adelaide was absolutely huge. She got a couple of goals, or maybe it was just the one, but she was definitely present in that forward line. No, I didn't lie. It was 2 goals. So what you have is, I don't think Port Adelaide will have the full luxury of having all their forward line be as active, because Hawthorn are very flexible. They have one of the best defenders in the competition, as well as, being fairly good off rebound. And they also head-to-head. Hawthorn have won both matchups in the past. Haven't played each other this year, but last year, Hawthorn were starting to climb up. They won 6-4 to 5-2 at it wouldn't be Icon Park, but it was wherever Hawthorn were playing. Frankston, actually, Kinetic Stadium.
Okay, fair enough.
So it'll be interesting. But yeah, as I said, it's very hard to say, like, because assuming that a fair chunk of people that might be listening to this didn't actually watch it, Port Adelaide's back half of the season, they haven't lost in 7 games. As I said, a bit of that's to do with fixturing, but they've got a world of confidence and they're a young team with nothing to lose. And they've been playing some very fast football. I've really liked some of the young teams, even if they haven't been good per se. And this includes a team like Richmond, West Coast as well, just starting to play a more attacking brand of football. We've seen a lot that defensive contests that end up being like a 4-6 to like 5-1 contest, where you're just going over a goal a quarter. But there definitely is a bit of proof from what we've seen this season that the AFL can have these aggressive matchups that happen. Because I don't think the AFL needs to go full offensive and have 10 goals each per game. but you do want a few clubs, a bit of diversity in how the game's played, and to have matchups like this that may open up, that may be a more offensive game to see. And I think of all the finals, like this would be the number one. Like I think you're going to see teams that approach North Melbourne, try and get very defensive, try and limit the options that they have. So even though North Melbourne's a very offensive team, they're looking to be a bit restricted. Adelaide, as we've seen, they've got a bunch of talent everywhere, but their backline's very restrictive still. And Fremantle just don't have the forward line to pull it off. But yeah, as I said, so these two teams should make for a very entertaining contest. I'm really hoping that this is another high, fast, paced game. You do have to give Hawthorn a bit of the edge just due to the, as I said, more complete nature of their team. But I've been really excited by what Port Adelaide's been able to do in a year where they're only, they were borderline possibly going to make finals.
Yeah.
To, being the only team to be a new finals winner this week. Obviously, Hawthorn haven't won yet. Even though they did get into the prelims, they haven't actually technically won a final yet. And as I said, none of the other new teams, even though it was good to see Essendon again make the finals, being another expansion team, didn't quite get there. So, but Adelaide want to continue the momentum, and Hawthorn, they'll be wanting to prove their worth. They've got a very experienced team. They will not want to go out in straight sets. So there's also a bit of pride to play for. And obviously the winner gets to, face the ultimate barometer in, oh wait, no, have I got that? They'll face the ultimate barometer in North Melbourne.
Yes.
So, any team that wins this match, they then get the ultimate muscle test. And if they end up beating North Melbourne, then, there's no reason to think why they wouldn't have the belief to win the finals altogether. So, hopefully we'll just see a two-team contest, playing a bit aggressively and playing with a bit of confidence, sort of like how the young men's Hawks team were playing against Port Adelaide.
That's what I was going to say. It's just like...
Yeah, it's for us a rest almost, you know what I mean?
It's just about that belief. Like, why not us, essentially?
Exactly. And, the funny thing is, again, Port Adelaide, I don't think they won a game until round 3 or 4. And again, they had 7 in a row to get into finals. 6 in a row to get into finals, this being the 7th game. So, there's a tiny bit of mirroring there from the way Hawthorn were like a young team that seemed to just be able to generate attack out of nowhere. And that's like represented by Port Adelaide, and Hawthorn's like the very solid team that, a bit shaky in terms of finals, being a bit unfair. I'm sort of shifting the narrative here to fit in, but they definitely don't want to be losing this game. Otherwise, they might feel like they haven't gotten as much out of this season as they would have liked to.
Yeah, that's completely fair and understandable. And it's like with these young teams especially, it is all about that belief. Like, you've made it this far, why not go further? Like, have that belief, have that confidence in yourself. You've made it to the second round of the final series. Have that trust in your group and yourselves. And who knows what could happen. And like the same could be said, as we said before, about like the Young Hawks men's team. Like, they had that belief, and that's how they made it to that semi-final. Nearly made it to a prelim.
Marginally off, exactly.
And the funny thing though is and this isn't related to finals at all, but I find it really, really funny calling a traditional men's team an expansion team in the women's league. Like Essendon, like Richmond.
Exactly.
It's so weird to me, but again, that's exactly what they are, because they didn't start as in the AFLW like initially.
And that's the thing. It's like, because there were so many
or in the VFLW
Melbourne
initially.
teams, as I mentioned, like the distribution of talent, and that's I think why. I don't want to be too harsh on Hawthorn. It's why they don't have as much like Melbourne in general support. Like I don't think there's as many like casual Melbourne fans wanting to support North Melbourne, considering they had so much talent go their way compared to what other teams were getting.
Yeah.
And, I'm not sure how much of that was just luck and how much of that was like a sign sort of thing. But you know what I mean? It's just like, I think some of the other teams, and it's not just Hawthorn, like even, we're talking about like Fremantle and Port Adelaide that had a few injuries. Both captains of each team, Port and Freo, out for the majority of the season. Huge players out for the majority of the season. Versus, Brisbane, Hawthorn, and North Melbourne, who've had a pretty clean run with injuries. So, they have something to prove. As I mentioned, Hawthorn being the expansion team, that's sort of not as, didn't have as much luxury. It's almost like comparing, the Dockers entering the league versus when West Coast initially entered the league. They just didn't have quite as much resources go their way.
Yeah.
Due to circumstances. Not West Coast. Like Suns or GWS. I'm sorry, I was meant to go forward.
No, that's all good.
I get
the point you're trying to make. It's all good.
So, yeah, and as I said, so they got stuff to prove. And obviously for North Melbourne and Hawthorn, they're new to being these elite teams. They're considered part of the two-tier competition, but neither have won a premiership yet. You got Brisbane and Adelaide who are just hogging all the premierships. They'll want to win to prove that. And obviously Adelaide and Brisbane want to prove that they're still worthy of thinking, even though, North Melbourne and arguably, at the time I was going to say Hawthorn, but, even Brisbane's proved that, they're more than capable of knocking off a team that was playing as well as Hawthorn. So, a lot of teams, a lot of things to play for. And I think it's shaping up to be a fantastic final season. And I implore, even if you didn't watch the regular season, just check these games out, because I think we're seeing more and more, even if, some of the score lines aren't as high scoring or whatever, you're starting to see a bit more, I think, general execution of game plans, which is what you want to see, especially in terms of finals. Like, we're at the point in the final series where most teams are able to do what they want because they have enough talent to execute more often than not, which is what we were sort of lacking in the earlier seasons, when you saw, defensive tactics like flooding around the bowls or, not going for marking contests because, they weren't always taken, just playing the crumb brown ball. You're seeing a lot more natural movement, which is absolutely fantastic to see. It's a bit disappointing that the lower half of the league isn't quite there yet. But in this, the teams that are remaining, there's still a lot of talent on the park.
Excellent to hear. Before we finalize and wrap up this episode, I want to briefly touch on the announcement. Not that I actually have a graphic for it, because I haven't been bothered to look for it. But it was announced that the 2024 NAB AFLW Grand Final will be a night Grand Final for the first time. I think location is still to be determined, because it does move around every year. I don't know if it's in relation to it's like a home grand final or something like that, or I know we talked about it like a week or two ago, but yeah, a night grand final is definitely interesting for the AFLW.
I'm a bit mixed on it, because I still think the best thing about AFLW is how family friendly it is.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the later you get into the night, harder it is to try and get, kids to go there and all that sort of stuff. And the other thing, obviously, being a traveling grand final, that night game is going to have significantly different start times, depending on which state ends up hosting it.
Very true.
Obviously, you've only got 2 Victorian teams left in it, and then you've got almost every state represented, except for... Wait, no, every state is... No, except for New South Wales.
New South Wales is not represented. They were indeed in the bottom 6, I think.
Yeah. Which is a shame, because, as I said, their AFLW attendance was reasonably good during the year. But yeah, no, as I said, so for me, I think it's, again, a bit of the AFL using AFLW as a bit of a testing ground. I don't particularly like it, because I don't think for the AFLW it suits them. So even for their own ideals, if they are using it, it won't even accurately reflect or have translative properties for the men's game.
No, it won't, because they're two entirely different leagues, even though they play the same sport.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I know what you mean. Like, in terms of the game, obviously, with the ideas that they're trying to implement, it's the same, but you're definitely talking to slightly different audiences.
Yeah, exactly right.
So yeah, I'm not really sure, but there have been some good night games that have been attended. So, depending on where it is, and maybe they do choose have a bit more hands-on choice of venue. I wouldn't like them choosing a venue just to suit the night game, but if it came down to that, I'm sure they'll probably do that because the AFL just loves dipping their fingers into things and mucking around. But hopefully, yeah, as I said, if it's just played as a night grand final, just as something different for, it might be okay. I just don't think it quite suits the AFLW, but that's also just like my opinion, man, sort of thing.
Well, we'll find out in 2 weeks, give or take 2 weeks,
Yeah,
as to whether it's viable or not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I believe that is everything that we want to talk about for this week. There, depending on if there's any other major news to come out during the week ahead, there might not be an episode next week, but there will be one the week after, because that will touch on the preliminary finals leading up to the grand final, and also the AFL men's draft, as that will be around the same time. But until then, I believe that will do it for us this week. So thank you all so much for coming to hang out, coming to listen, coming to watch. I'm still streaming as much as I can all through November for my November charity campaign. Again, the QR code is down there. Link, of course, is always in the description of the videos for both Spotify and YouTube. It's also all over my socials, so go check those out as well. I hopefully there should be at least 4 streams this week at minimum. I am busy on the Saturday, so I might not even get to watch the AFLW games because of it. But in that case, there won't be a stream from me either. Probably the Saturday night. We shall see. Either way, come and support me. If you're able to donate some money, I would really, really appreciate it. Currently, we have raised $365, which is incredible. On the road to my target goal of 500. If we reach 500, I will be donating that exact amount myself to make it an even 1,000. Or I will match the highest donation at that time if we get under, which is, it's still got plenty of time to go. Still got 2.5 weeks, give or take. So I'm really looking forward to, just continuing on with this campaign. But yeah, thank you all so much. We may see you next week. If not, we will see you the week after. I hope you all have a great week ahead, and we will see you later.